Greetings, friends. This is Steve Dupuy for the Bible News Prophecy Program with Dr. Bob Thiel. Dr. Thiel, it's no secret the United States has a lot of other nations concerned about its debt load. One such group of nations is the BRICS group. What is the latest state of their alliance?
Well, the BRICS group, first, for people who are not familiar with it, consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This particular alliance is growing. They've invited 6 more members to join it in 2024. And according to India's Minister of External Affairs, there's another 6 that they perhaps want to expand with. So this would make them bigger and bigger and represent a huge portion of the world's population, as well as a growing and significant part of the world's economy. Now, consistent with one of the main goals of BRICS, 2 of its founding members have decided to stop using the United States dollar for their cross-border trade. Now, let me explain this first. It used to be that most countries that traded across borders after the fall of the communism, to a degree, have used the United States dollar. So let's say they didn't want the Russian ruble, or they didn't want the Deutschmark, or they didn't want something else. And so people who bought and sold using US dollars, and that helps the United States, by the way. It reduces inflation, it gives revenue for the United States Treasury, the United States banking system, et cetera. It's been helpful for it. Well, but it doesn't help those countries if they can get around it. So in late December of 2023, saw this headline: Russia and China no longer using dollar for trade. It says during a meeting, the Russians and Chinese got together, and they said they've almost completely eliminated the use of dollar, the US dollar, for trade between themselves. They're now doing trade in both rubles and yuan. And it says it used to be they only did that for about 20% of their trade. Now it's nearly 100%, and the goal is to have no US dollars involved in their trade.
So the number of BRICS countries are growing, with some already not using the US dollar. Is the United States concerned about this at all?
Yes. I saw an article written by former State Department official by the name of Thomas Hill. And let me read some of what he wrote. The BRICS-led de-dollarization effort should alarm U.S. policymakers, especially in light of the recent BRICS membership expansion. It's clear that traditional U.S. allies are already exploring ways to de-dollarize, and that Beijing, China, is helping that process move forward. And he also said that global coordination against the dollar would also impact U.S. fiscal health, limiting the country's ability to run large federal deficits and keep debt costs grounded.
So Mr. Hill says that global coordination against the dollar is limiting the country's ability to run large deficits. Isn't that like my bank telling me my credit cards are maxed out?
Close, because the U.S. still has some ability, but it's getting very close, yes.
Okay. So what would this global coordination against the dollar look like?
Well, basically, countries are trying to figure out if they back their currency with gold, or they just use their own currencies, that they can just bypass using the US dollar. Now, the time is going to come, by the way, that the US dollar is going to be worth nothing more than the cotton paper it's printed on, the scrap value or the nostalgia value. Now, as far as BRICS pushing on this, in the fall of 2023, saw this headline: BRICS countries could swing an economic wrecking ball at dollar dominance even without a shared currency, according to a former White House economist by the name of Joe Sullivan. Says eventually those trends could help put the greenback in a similar position as the British pound, Sullivan warned, because that used to be the world's reserve currency. And furthermore, he stated, the BRICS plus states don't even necessarily have to have a shared currency to chip away at the king dollar's domain. If they pay each member their own national currency, the dollar's role in the world economy would go down. There would not be a clear replacement as other the dollar's global reserve, but a variety of currencies other than the dollar would gain in importance. Okay. So yeah, the BRICS impact will affect the West, and it's mainly a push against U.S. and Anglo-American dominance.
So how will the BRICS impact the West?
According to another article I read, titled 10 U.S. sectors to be affected if BRICS stops using the dollar. They say the global will be affecting its ability to impact the global financial system. It's going to affect banking and finance, energy and commodity markets, because a lot of commodities are priced in US dollars, international trade and investment. Number 5, capital markets. 6, consumer goods and retail, because having the dollar as the reserve currency has actually reduced inflation. People may not know that because things would cost a lot more. Dollar was not the primary trading and reserve currency. 7, production and consumption. 8, technology. 9, government policy. 10, travel and tourism. But I think the situation will be much worse than just some complications there. We will end up with massive inflation and ultimately hyperinflation. When the US dollar loses its dominance, it'll be a disaster beyond what most people are willing to imagine. Now, I saw something last fall from Daniel Babinski, who wrote, U.S. economy is in desperate need of reform, but our elected officials keep spending monies that came out of nowhere. About 34 trillion in debt. The Congressional Budget Office said that number is going to double before 2053. The rest of the world is looking at this and realizing they don't want to go down with our sinking ship. They're forming new alliances, one of which is BRICS. The BRICS countries see the writing on the financial wall, and to protect themselves, they're looking at creating their own currency, which will counter the US dollar on a world stage. It could be ready to launch by the summer of 2024. If and when that happens, US dollar will no longer be king and the entire global financial system will shift. It's likely to be a financial earthquake at a magnitude we've never seen.
So Mr. Boblinski paints a bleak future with his reference to a financial earthquake. Do you agree?
He's right. It's going to be a financial earthquake beyond the magnitude of anything the US has ever seen. Now, in the mail about a dozen years ago, I got something unsolicited from Dr. Martin Weiss talking about American apocalypse. And he wrote, what's the historic, life-changing, world-changing event that's about to vaporize massive amounts of wealth, potentially threaten our liberties right here in America? It's the singular moment in time when the last investor willing to loan money to the government calls it quits. It's when the government can no longer borrow and simply runs out of money. I'm talking about a sudden rejection of US debt by the world's investors. I'm under no delusion here. I know the vast majority of Americans will fail to heed this warning and fail to get ready for this crisis. And he's right, the situation's at least that dire.
So you, Mr. Weiss, and Mr. Boblinski seem to basically be in agreement. What does God have to say?
The Word of God warns about debt. Furthermore, there's a warning from the prophet Habakkuk. Let's go to Habakkuk chapter 2, starting in verse 6. Will not all these take up a proverb against him and a taunting riddle against him and say, woe to him who increases what is not his, how long? And to him who loads himself with many pledges. Now, savings bond, treasury bills, treasury notes are all pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will not they awaken who oppress you, and you will become their booty? Because you plundered many nations, and the remnant of the people shall plunder you, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it.
So how exactly are these verses pointing to the USA?
USA is the most indebted nation of all time. This is not a prophecy about the tiny nation called Israel, which does not have enemy creditors. It's an end-time prophecy for the US. Like Martin Weiss warned, foreign creditors at some point in time will rise up quickly. I saw a chart in the late fall of 2023 that showed the United States had about a third of all global government debt, yet the United States only has 4.25% of the world's population. U.S. is in massive debt. Now, I want to go back to Habakkuk 2 and go back a few verses and read some other things that God told the prophet Habakkuk to write. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it, for the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry.
So these verses are a prelude to the verses you just read, but I don't understand what this means. Though it tarries, wait for it, and then it says, it will not tarry. Can you explain that?
What this is saying is the pledges keep going up, but things haven't happened yet. Don't think it's going to continue on forever. It's going to wait for a little while, which is what tarrying means, but it's not going to tarry forever. And as far as the BRICS nations go, they see USA debt risk, and they also despise US sanctions policies. They clearly want to topple the dominance of the US and its dollar, as, by the way, do the Europeans, which is part of the reason they came up with the euro.
So I want to come back to that comment in a minute that you made on the euro, but please continue.
As far as the BRICS, one of the reasons they were formed, according to the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, was to eliminate the US dollar's reserve currency status. And so that is one of the reasons they were formed. Now, the Bible, by the way, warns against cheapening the money supply. Yet, by printing up money, getting the debt, etc., the United States is ignoring that. In the debt policies under the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations, following previous ones, have ignored these warnings and greatly increased the debt.
So can you tie this in with Europe and the euro?
Yeah, the Europeans didn't want to be tied into the US dollar. It's one of the reasons they actually came up with the euro, so they could trade within Europe. Two different reasons. One, so they know the price of things. And two, that it's actually three. Two, they didn't have to have US dollar involved. And three, because they wanted an alternative world reserve currency to the US dollar. And based on various prophecies I've seen, the Europeans and the Asians are going to cooperate for a time and ultimately eliminate the United States and its Anglo-Saxon descended allies. They're even going to divide their lands according to Daniel 11, verse 39. But getting back to the euro, part of the purpose of Europe was, again, to bypass the US dollar for international trade. And this has certainly happened within the Eurozone, as well as some nations in Europe who actually use it as a secondary currency, instead of the dollar like they used to.
I never realized that before. The euro has already done what the BRICS are about to do. Is the snowball gaining speed?
Yes, but still tarrying as far as most people are concerned.
All right.
Steps toward pushing away Anglo-American dominance of the world over the past couple centuries is happening. And while the BRICS nations won't dominate it economically like the coming European Babylonian beast power will, what the BRICS nations are doing and their actions will have major impacts on the world. And even secular sources are noticing this both within the United States and outside the United States. As Jesus said in Mark 13:37, and what I say to you all, watch.
It's fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Teal. For more interviews with Dr. Teal, in addition to written as well as audio articles, visit our website at BibleNewsProphecy.net. This is Steve Dupuy for the Bible News Prophecy Program.